You got a heavy hitter here. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you, Brother Timothy.
Yes, let me tell you something, sir. You know, I myself have been telling people in the last 10 years about King's book, Community of Chaos. I said the measure of a man is just a touch. But Community of Chaos, where do we go from here? King's book should be required reading around the United States of America, man. You know, just like the Philadelphia Negro should be required reading in Philadelphia.
Right.
But getting back to it, you know, when you talked about the Violence Movement, right? And I said to myself, a lot of people have not read Black Gods of the Metropolis, and
right.
I'm pretty sure that Jones came across that because
That's
the way
right.
that he tapped into those movements of those guys like Divine, Elijah
right.
Muhammad, and Daddy Grace. It talks about them in that book very specifically. But the way you connected the dots, I'm like, Brother Joey, who came on before me, I'm from the tip of number 12. Him and I soldiers together, so I could connect those dots with Booth. I could connect it with the Panthers who were stripped in Philadelphia to Cleveland, the Panther movement over in the West. And I'm going to say this, that they said that Cleveland, out of all of them, probably was the worst agent that had came in the Black Panther Party, so it's up to he had been through. But I'm going to say this to you, brother, and making you help me see more of what went on during this time period of how we've been duped and what has become before us and the races of America. You just opened up so good. And by you being from New York, I thought about, because I also thought another person who observed the movements of those people was Clarence Thirtieth, the father they call him, over in New York, because he used those names like right. Father Divine,
right.
those, you know, like Flower,
right.
Divine, Lorraine, and things of that
right.
nature. And right, exactly. And he was a person who was misunderstood. Unfortunately, he was assassinated. And his movement was good. The things
That's right.
that he came from the nation, and what the nation could learn from him is they should have studied their lessons more. And what the Father since could learn from the Muslims, they could have been more disciplined in their actions.
That's right. That's right. And what's really powerful, again, Elliot, this is why I'm investing my commitment to this work. People don't know that in San Francisco, in the 70s, the Black Panther Party, I'm sorry, correct that.
No,
the Nation of Islam lived right next door, immediately next door. I mean, the next building next door to the People's Temple. People's Temple and the Nation of Islam were next door neighbors.
Wow.
So that when Elijah Muhammad, listen to this, so that when Farrakhan leaves the nation, when he's heartbroken because Elijah Muhammad's son Wallace Muhammad takes over about 1976, 1977, during that time, the way in which Wallace Muhammad at that time allows the first white woman to become a member of the Nation of Islam.
Exactly.
What most people don't realize is the way it plays out here, again, this is why I'm talking about California politics. In California, in San Francisco, because they were next door neighbors, Jim Jones and Wallace Muhammad organized a major public rally down in L.A. at the sports at the Los Angeles Coliseum, where thousands and thousands of members of the People's Temple and the Nation of Islam came together, and it was to be a part of the integration of the Nation of Islam.
Wow.
So Elijah Muhammad's son Wallace was using Jim Jones against Farrakhan.
Wow.
Specifically out here in San Francisco. Only there, not in general, just in San Francisco, because these two organizations were next door neighbors, and Jim Jones had this radical revolutionary pretense. The Nation of Islam said, well, here we have an opportunity. We got this devil next door to us, and they did have fights. There were conflicts. There were confrontations early, but eventually they became peaceful. And when they did, it was when Elijah's son Wallace took over the nation and allowed it to be integrated. And part of it being integrated at the local level in San Francisco was to have a friendly relationship with Jim Jones and the People's Temple. So the Temple people, which is what the Nation of Islam used to be called in the 30s, and the People's Temple were organizing and forming a racial coalition here in California, in both San Francisco and Oakland, and in Los Angeles, these three black communities, before it all went to hell in 1978. So what's really powerful, though, Elliot, what people don't know is before Jim Jones, though, this goes back a little bit further. What people don't know is Father Divine, again, I just published a piece on this. Both Father Divine and Daddy Grace they come to Los Angeles in about 1903-04. Because in Los Angeles, there's something known as the Azusa Avenue Miracle. Azusa Avenue, anybody who's Pentecostal or Kajik, Church of God in Christ, will know what I'm talking about and what I'm about to say. But at the Azusa Miracle, led by a black man named William J. Seymour, this black man teaches something called the full gospel. And he's saying that the literal Bible, the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John just ain't enough. The Holy Ghost got to come alive. The Word got to come alive. The Holy Spirit got to indwell. And so through these teachings, they have these religious revivalist experiences that become known as glossolalia, or speaking in tongues. It is the speaking in tongues experience in Los Angeles in 1904 or 3 that Father Divine and Daddy Grace, apart from each other, not together, apart from each other, both men just come to see what's going on out here in L.A. at Azusa Avenue, because the word has gone around the country. Father Divine comes out here. Father Divine goes to William J. Seymour's church. He speaks in tongues like everybody else did. Father Divine believes that the indwelling God Spirit, the indwelling Holy Spirit, for everybody else was just the Holy Spirit like everybody else was speaking. But for Father Divine, it was him becoming God.
Yeah.
So I'm saying to you that the California connection to this kind of thinking that black people supported predates Jim Jones by 60 years with Father Divine. I'm saying to your audience and to you that Father Divine came to California, and that's when he decided he was God. When he got the Holy Ghost in L.A., this happened to Daddy Grace also, in a totally independent conversion and religious experience apart from Father Divine's. Daddy Grace had the same thing happen to him, and Daddy Grace began to say he's not God, but he says he's anything in the Bible that references grace. He's God's grace, and therefore you don't need God. God's grace is here, and God's grace is sufficient. That's what Daddy Grace used to say. You don't need God. God's grace is here, and God's grace is sufficient. That's all you need, right? But his original inspiration was the religious experience he had in L.A. And so I'm saying that as a foundation for understanding that black folk were thinking these ways. What the earlier caller said, what about black women and black religion? Well, black folk didn't just embrace Baptists and Methodists when we did finally embrace it after slavery ended. They also adopted all kinds of religious, unconventional religious ideas, like the Nation of Islam, like the Moorish Science Temple of Noble Drew Ali, like MOVE and other organizations. And so People's Temple was one of those alternatives. But it's important to know that Father Divine had provided a base for this kind of new thought, black religious thinking in California, even though most of the people out here who accepted Father Divine were white and wealthy, because Father Divine drove back to New York in his $200,000 Duesenberg car that a white woman from the Peace Mission out here in Los Angeles gave him for free because she said Father Divine healed her. She gave Father Divine her Duesenberg, which was worth $200,000 in the 1900s. It was, when I was a kid, I was told as a kid it was the most expensive car on earth. And Father Divine had one of them.
Can I say something, Elliot?
Thank you for. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Let me say this, Elliot.
Go ahead.
Elliot, I'm going to say something. What he's saying is so true, and they couldn't catch Father Divine on nothing. And what he's saying, Father Divine had a hidden group amongst him that a lot of people did not know about. From the black woman he married to the woman that he took and married that came to Canada, who we know now as Mother Lorraine. But I want to say one more thing before I go. Listen, I think a lot of people misunderstood King when it came to integration, okay? And I think that what the people who were with King did not understand is that if King said integrate, he didn't mean for you to give up your businesses. He didn't mean for you to give up your school.
Right.
He didn't mean for you to give up your community. He didn't say integrate, but he said, well, goddamn, but don't give up to them. Keep what you have and work with them to come back to your own community and build it.
That's right.
Now, if they took that hook, line, and sinker, the white man's bait, well, that's a shame.
That's right.
Because if you don't have that in the part of the formula, while you building after I build, I'm gonna give it away. That's crazy.
Right.
You think of generations and generations have it afterwards.
That's right.
Well, it's been great talking to you, but remember they marry out. We can walk and talk, baby.
Tim,
Yes,
thank you for your call, man.
But Elliot, let me make another point if I can, and that is to sort of show how powerful Father Divine was way before Jim Jones comes out here. I'm trying to and that's why you see a chapter in the book saying the Father Divine chapter, because the Father Divine chapter is important because there was a California connection to this kind of black. I don't want to use the word cult. This is my first time using the word cult in this whole conversation because I don't really get into that. I'm not really interested in rehashing the cult aspect of all of this because that's what to me has gotten in the way, is they only see it as a religious cult and they don't see this as a black movement led by a white man who destroyed them. And that's what I'm interested in bringing out. And that's why I'm not interested in dwelling on the cult aspect of it. But I think it's important to know that Father Divine laid a foundation here in California. I haven't been able to make the direct connection between Father Divine's foundation out here and Jim Jones's movement because Jones went out there to Philadelphia repeatedly, like I said earlier, trying to meet and to meet with Father Divine. But there was already a Father Divine Peace Mission presence in California, and that's what I'm trying to get at. It was so powerful, Elliot. You won't believe this, what I'm about to tell you, but I just discovered this in my recent research on Father Divine. That Father Divine came out here to California, as I told you, and he had this religious experience where he had other symptoms. His wife had told him she thought he was God when he first got married, on the day they got married. And then he had this religious experience in California. That was the second sign. And the third sign was when a judge died after the judge tried to send him to prison in 1932 for a public nuisance in Long Island, where Father Divine and 50 black people had moved to a place called Sayville, Sayvill, Sayville, Long Island. And in sentencing Father Divine, the judge went too far and sentenced him to a year. And everyone had told the judge if he did it, he was going to die. And the judge died, and he was relatively healthy. And that was kind of the third thing. So the wife at the wedding told Father Divine he was God. Then he comes to California and has this religious experience at Azusa Avenue, and then the third one is when the judge dies, right? So those are these sort of confirming developments in his life. But Father Divine also had Peace Mission headquarters throughout L.A. and up here in Northern California, where I am. And what's phenomenal, Elliot, is that the people in Oakland, California, were so powerful in their Peace Mission work that when Garvey had been arrested and deported out of this country, and Calvin Coolidge allowed Garvey to leave America from an Atlanta prison, they deported him back to England, where he died about 1941. But what people don't know is that in Oakland, California, Father Divine's Peace Mission was so powerful that it came here and it colonized a UNIA movement headquarters and converted a Garvey movement headquarters, a UNIA, a United Negro Improvement Association headquarters in Oakland, California, was converted from a Garvey movement organization and turned into a Father Divine Peace Mission movement church headquarters. Father Divine was more powerful than Garvey out here in California. Father Divine was more powerful than Garvey out there in Harlem in his heyday. Father Divine's mission out here in California was so powerful that Garvey's people converted over to follow Father Divine. And then they all went to England and they went to England from Oakland after they converted converted Garvey's movement into a Father Divine church. And then went to England and tried to convert Garvey to become a follower of Father Divine. That's the power that black man had. He was more powerful than Garvey out here in California. And so when Jim Jones finally comes here in the 60s, Those black women I was describing earlier that were moving out here with these white migrations, where 5 million black people move around this country from the deep south between World War I and World War II, People's Temple did not just tap into a bunch of ignorant black people. These were black folk that had experienced Father Divine and the Peace Mission and the best of this kind of religious organization, of, you know, organizing behind a charismatic personality like Jones or Father Divine. Father Divine did not mistreat the people, and there's nothing that anybody can point to that shows that Father Divine abused or mistreated his people.
Let's go to caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from? Are you there?
Hello. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me clearly, Elliot?
Yes.
Greetings to you, Elliot, and greetings to you, Richard, as well as to Dr. Taylor. This is Sarah calling in from Dallas.
How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing as well as can be expected, and it's very interesting. Professor Taylor, can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. I know the two of us, we butt heads, but we can agree to disagree on a few main topics. But that's not what I called about tonight. What you're touching on with this situation with the Jim Jones and the religious aspects with black people and our tendency to follow cult personality leadership, it's very telling, because I was flipping the channels on my TV about a couple days ago, and I happened to watch Jim Baker, of all people, because they had something to do with the I guess they were doing a documentary on Jim Baker and his wife Tammy Faye Baker, and giving a background history about their situation, and to see how white people, how they always redeem their people. And they bring him right back, because right now he's still back into the televangelist business, and right now he is doing what is called the survivalist type things, whereby the Alex Jones type, who always believe that something is going to happen and you need to get your survival kit and get ready to get you into your bunkers and all this other crap. That's the brand of religion that he is selling, and he's still raking in the money, and black people are still doing it. And which brings me right back to what he was stating with the followership with black people, and how we tend, black women in particular, one of the callers had asked, if there's something about our personality and religion. And I know that has nothing to do with me, because I've always hated religion. From a child coming up, I hated religion. Because I remember to this day, I was talking to my sister in New York last weekend. We were laughing about it. Well, my parents would send us to church as children with our little envelope that we had to give out back then in those days. You get your little envelope to put your little donations in. We never put it in the plate. We used to just open it and used to go after church and go spend it. So, in order to tell you, at that age, we know at such a young age, we already knew that this was a big scam. So we never did. We never was into the donation thing. But what you were stating in regards to with the Nation of Islam, and I'm coming from Atlanta, my husband used to listen to all these different religious things and used to try and investigate it to see whether or not he wanted to get involved with that. And what you said is very true about with Wallace Muhammad, and to me, I've taken it right back to the Nation of Islam, and they found it, because to me, what I've seen with them is that they might say that they're not affiliated with a Christian denomination or whatever, but they tend to still want to have somebody as white or close to looking white to be in charge of their leadership.
Yeah.
Because if you look and you go and see the hierarchy of who's running the nation, from Farrakhan to all the student ministers under them, if you don't have the right complexion, you're not going to move up into leadership position, which is what Dr. Collins found out at a later date, even though he was a great and all of that, but he was too dark. He did not pass the paperback test. Let's put it quite frank. He did not pass the paperback test. And with what you were saying with Wallace, it's the same thing, because when he left the nation and he formed the Muslim the American Muslim Association, whatever it is, when he went into Orthodox Islam, and he started doing the same thing, you saw the same tendency with him, because he was chasing after the Saudis, the straight hair people. The white Muslims, they want to be as close under them as possible, and did whatever these white people did. So when you made a connection with him and with Jim Jones, it seems that we cannot follow any religion unless it has somebody with straight hair at the head of it, leading it, for black people to feel comfortable in doing it. We're the only group of people who do not feel comfortable looking at a deity that looks like ourselves.
But I would say that with the exception of Father Divine, he's the one exception. But it's also true that he did not identify himself as a black god as much as he just simply said he happened to be in this particular little body because he was about 4'9". He was a very short man, a 4'9" man. He wasn't even 5 feet tall. And so so in that sense, Divine is one example where black folk really, I mean, he was considered bigger than Joe Louis in Harlem. There were two giants in Harlem in the 40s. 30s and 40s, and it was Father Divine and Joe Louis. And of course, Joe Louis represented all that importance for black history, breakthrough with boxing, and what that represented for black men in particular, et cetera. But my point is, time has moved on, and we've forgotten about Father Divine. But this black man was so powerful. You got to remember, he survived J. Edgar Hoover. After J. Edgar Hoover brought down W.E.B. Du Bois, he brought down Paul Robeson, and he brought down Marcus Garvey. He couldn't even touch Father Divine. He never even came up against Father Divine, and Father Divine was doing miraculous things. And I wish there was a way, because for us to retain the powerful community-based consciousness that he had, the organizational intelligence he had, the business acumen that he had, and replicate it and duplicate it and begin to model it, because we act like our history is over. We still got a lot of history to accomplish as a race and as a people. And there might still be some lessons in Father Divine. As I was looking at him, everyone's moved on beyond him, but in his heyday, this black man owned most of Harlem. And still owns, I mean, he was throwing $500 bills around in the 20s. So I'm just saying, maybe there's something there that you and I can agree on, Sarah, that might be useful from a sense of black community and black organization that is not just about historicizing Father Divine and these others, but maybe we can figure out, because I think the Nation of Islam had the power and the potential to really be that entity that could serve as a role model for black people on how to do other things as an organization. But oftentimes it got caught up in its own stuff and didn't focus as much on our stuff as a people that it needed to.
Well, what I found that was so very disingenuous with our organization, I get offended when because it seems like with a lot of us, in order for them to organize black people to do something communally, they'd always have to be religious based. And that is what really and truly pisses me off, because it seems like every time you have to do something, you have to come in the disguise of pushing religion first. If you're hungry, you're starving, you do the same thing in Africa all over the place where you see poor people.
Well, let me ask you, Sarah. Let me ask you the question that the brother asked us, and Elliot, this is for everybody. Do you think it's more black women than black men? Do you think black men would be responsive to a workers' solidarity, Asa Philip Randolph type workers' union type message of black union and organizing, or does religion can you talk to black folk without religion? And if so, is that because of the role of black women in black community?
Well, as I was telling a friend of mine earlier tonight, I think a lot of it has to do with the matriarchal system that was set up for us in slavery, where black women, where the white man put the black woman in charge as a means of controlling the black man, and that is still going on up to today. Because you find that a lot of black women would come in and jump in and try to demasculinize their sons, trying to make them to be as soft as possible so they wouldn't stand or they wouldn't take notice. And you see the same way, and that is why a lot of them run up into the doggone church, because you can go up into the church and you can find cloaking, because the white man ain't going to bother you. As long as you pushing that lobotomy called religion, he's going to let you, run around. You say, I ain't got to worry with this Negro because they're already gone. They're pushing this philosophy here, and I don't have to worry about them. But when you start pushing a religious base, and it talks about black liberation like Dr. King did towards the end of his life, and Malcolm and all of them started today with black people needing to do for ourselves and stop looking for handouts from the same people who enslaved us. That's when you become a threat. But as long as you're like a T.D. Jakes and you're talking this nonsense about, universality and transgenderism and all this other foolishness that they push, you are of no threat. And that is the problem. That's where a lot of us go into, because we feel as long as we can talk about the hereafter and not about our present situation and where we want to go in the future. We always talk about death, because that's what religion is always about, is where you're going to go when you die, but you're not worrying about what you're doing for the people who you're leaving behind and what you're going to do for your circumstances. And that is what really ticked me off, because we need to start operating in a business model. Like I said before, all of these are the Jews do not use a rabbi to represent them in any kind of business transaction. And every time you see black people have something to do, you always see the religious leaders get pulled out first. They're always leading the pack. You don't see no one, you see anybody with any kind of business sense being called in to do anything, because there's no one to bring these religious leaders, which is why we got shafted with the civil rights bill. Because
I think you're right. And no, you're right. And at this point, we thought, even after King, even after, let's say, Fred Casey Price in the 80s and 90s, after the black religious guys, like you mentioned, all those religious people in evangelical movements, even after all of that, you would think that we would still be further along in terms of the black church being activated to make itself relevant to black people. It would seem to me that as consumers, black people would make demands on the black church to serve its needs that aren't being met in terms of the community-based and civil society kind of stuff that either the government or other agencies can't do. The churches are taking in billions at least. And it seems to me that there ought to be, independent of denominations, a general expectation that black people have from black churches in America that are well-resourced. If you're a poor black storefront church, okay, we know. But if you are well-sourced, these mega churches and these well-connected church alliances and fellowships around the country, they should be, and I'm not talking about some building programs or these piecemeal, or we got a prison program, we talking the San Quentin prison, that kind of stuff. I'm talking about revolutionary religion, where these churches are organized to transform black life in a way that blesses it and doesn't require everybody to become a member in order to receive its blessings. Otherwise, the churches are irrelevant in the future.
But unfortunately, that's what it has come down to. It's all about a membership drive. It's all about having a body count so that they can collect, they can fleece you, empty your pockets in these buildings. That's what it's all about. Because as you said, I don't see all of these HBCUs that are going on there that are always begging for money. And a lot of them came from their church base, most of the Methodist denomination or the Baptist denomination that are part of these HBCUs. I don't see why a mega church such as a T.D. Jakes or a Creflo Dollar or Eddie Long's and all of these other churches or Freddie Haynes out here, I don't see why these schools, like right now, we have like Paul Quinn College that's right up the road here in Dallas. No, they have become now, you see a whole bunch of more Hispanics that are on campus there, and you find black students. It's like all across the country that these historical schools who were founded by our ancestors to educate black people, you cannot go on campus now and find something that is not totally where you out the picture, where you always thought that you need to put yourself last. To quote the Chairman Fred Jr., we become the Rodney Dangerfields of the ethnic group. We command no respect.
Yep.
That's what we become. We feel it's, we have to bootlick and fetch water for everybody else in order for us to get some kind of respect. And Keith Ellison was a typical example, because here it is, he's supposed to be a Muslim, and because of something he did with Farrakhan over 20 years ago, because these people don't forget nothing. They always have to tell us we need to forgive and forget, turn the other cheek. But they don't. They have they don't forget nothing. They wanted to denounce Farrakhan. They went out against him, and I knew he wasn't going to get it, because all them same Democrats, even Barack Obama, because they said he was working the phone lines to get Perez to be the new DNC chair. So all of that groveling that he did, throwing Farrakhan and everybody black on the bus, look where his behind ended up. I hope the people in this district put his ass out to the office come next election, because he showed that he don't stand on, he don't have no racial solidarity. I mean, they all need to go. And that's why I keep saying this religion thing with black folks, if I can snap my finger and have all this stuff disappear, it would be a relief for black people, because we need to get our heads from out to the future. We need to get our heads from out trying to live in the doggone hereafter and worry about where we are right now in the present, which is not good.
Sarah, thank you for your call.
I have to.
All right.
I have to jump in and say just to your question, Professor Taylor, because I think it's important in the way, Sarah, because I think that we can't, and I'm in my mind right now, and I'm looking at what you had said earlier about the ring shout, right? I'm looking at our historical thing about the question about what we before thought was being inspired. We don't call it inspired, if not spiritual. It was a communal effort. It was people coming together. I mean, the success is like dance. It's like being in jazz, and it's like being an athlete. We recognize that moment of ecstasy is another kind of communication. I don't think we should overlook that. I agree now with the organizational process of hierarchical, where you have one person being that, embodying that, and then everybody else just going along. That doesn't create community.
Right.
From what I understand, that community, this whole maintaining, the reason why it took so long for Africans to become Christian, because they come out of a tradition where community was God, not an individual was a representative of God. And I don't think we should, as we're conceptualizing community, because I think that, and it's great that what you're showing is the question about chaos, but when we're talking about moving to community, what kind of community, how do we create community? And I don't think we should lose that point of that inspiration that women could feel, because how their relationships in that whole growth process of being the arbitrator of the perpetuation of the future community. That, to me, for me, enunciating that's just a projection of my thought.
Yeah,
but I think the elements have to be that ecstasy, that communal organization, and it has to be about resource exchange, which is what we don't have. It can't be about what used to be the Christian thing of, what is that, tribute. You get your piece, you give it to one centralized, and they're supposed to redistribute it.
Right.
That's the structure we're in, most of these systems are in now. And that depends on the individual who's at the head.
And see what's so powerful about Father Divine, again, I'm not a follower of Father Divine. I'm not religious at all. But what's phenomenal to me is Father Divine gets all the credit, and people think that he even had a print machine, like a U.S. Mint print machine, because he had so much money during the Great Depression. But what we and Martin Luther King, and this is the sad thing about Martin Luther King to me, Martin Luther King never had a program. He had a bunch of good ideas. He was an idealist, but King did not have a program. And Father Divine had a program. And it was actually carried out through a unique shared or pooled resources approach. What Father Divine did was he did take the people's money, but they pooled it together themselves, all of them, not just him. Mm-hmm. They were willing to let him be the face of it. But the miracle of Father Divine and his resources was that black people who followed him, about 50, pulled their money together, and they all worked originally in Long Island at an employment agency that he was the face of, and he would have these people go work as domestics throughout Long Island as the house domestics, cleaning up and all. They would bring their money back to him. He would pool it. He would treat them like kings and queens. He would feed them every single day, twice a day, better than the President of the United States was eating. And he did this, Elliot, through an approach of pooled black money. And we haven't learned this from Father Divine because we want to dismiss him as a religious freak, and we didn't learn the lessons from him. And I'm saying, in a weird way, we're doing the same thing with Jim Jones and People's Temple. We are dismissing the lessons that can be learned because of the freakishness of the way it all went down. But Father Divine gave us a way that even the Nation of Islam and no other group does well. And that is to take the resources of the black community and pool them and distribute them in a way that is equitable for the community and not just for the family of the pastor or the Mahdi or the chosen one or whatever you want to call the Messiah of the time. It can't be pimping the people for his advantage. But Father Divine found a way to distribute resources so that the people lived well, and they flourished, and everybody lived well, and they didn't feed them on some bread lines like they were some people to be served and keep on going. You come to Father Divine, he said you can stay here as long as you want, just abide by our moral rules and requirements. You can eat all you want, and we want you to go out and work. And then when they investigated and sent spies and COINTELPRO type things trying to investigate Father Divine, all they found was a black cooperative. Father Divine was the face of a black cooperative. Elliot, why can't we try black cooperatives? Why can't we try new things? Because what we've been doing is not working.
It ain't working. Yeah. Let's go to 646 area code. What's your name? Where you calling from? 646. 646. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me, Elliot?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Jay. Do it ever come to the mind that black people like to be under of other people?
Say that again, Jay. You broke up. Go ahead. Say it again.
Do it ever come to mind that black people just like to be under the thumb of others? That it makes them feel as though they're not responsible for their existence as a people? That they need to be led to water? You know, at some point in time, if you look at all of these things and all of these situations, it's like you're looking for one person to stand out front and to do the necessary things that you need to do for your survival and your people. You know what I mean? And most of all, it just seems like it has to be a light-skinned Negro or a white man. You know what I mean? Just like you were talking earlier about Khalid Muhammad. You know, I thank God every day that I had the opportunity to meet Khalid, to talk to Khalid, and all of that. And can I tell you something? That was one of the most beautiful black men I ever saw in my life. When you see Brother Khalid, man, you saw God. That's how beautiful that brother was. You know what I mean? Yep. And you know, brothers in the nation, you got to give them credit. They have a shine and all of that. But, brother, when you looked at that brother there, he was special. And you don't see that with these pork chop chicken eating preachers. You don't see it with the white man. You don't see it at all. It's just like you were talking about the black woman. The black woman, in all truthfulness and honesty, 95% of them are not going to lead you anywhere because they have this submissiveness to the white man based on the brutality that he put on them. You know, in my life, I've seen a couple of strong black women, and one of the strongest, another one I had the opportunity to be a part of, Sister Soldier. Now look at her. She don't fall back to being nothing but an author. But I will honestly say this to you. That black woman there has one of the most brilliant minds you could ever come across.
Yes, sir.
There is no female out here that could do what she could do. She's the type of sister that could lead the people to liberation. That's how sharp her mind was. You know, everybody talks about these so-called intellectual, slick-talking Negroes that got something to say and all of that. Ain't none of them could hold their own with that sister. I know because I was there when that no-good Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Reverend Butts, you know, Farrakhan, Cornell Russ, and the rest of them told her, leave Bill Clinton alone. Because I will go down in history to my dying day and say that if she was allowed to respond to Bill Clinton, we would have never had that no-good cracker. He would have never got into the White House because she would have exposed him and she would have ate his ass alive.
Right.
Because you can't really never say in that period of time or in our real history that we really, really ever had a strong black African woman stand up and put it on a cracker. You know what I mean? And she was the one. He just, you know, for some reason we punked out. I was there. I was in the room. I was around it. I seen it. know what I mean? It was one of those things to whereas I'm telling you, she would have ate his ass alive. Because I've been in the room before we would go to marches, when we would be in study groups, when we would just be sitting down talking and articulating and things of that nature. And I'm telling you, I've only run across maybe a couple of women that had that sharpness between her and Marima and me, and maybe a couple that people haven't heard of, that have really had the ability to articulate our struggle and to put forward. We don't have women like that. They're too much into the mystery white Jesus. That's why you had it, Jim Jones. And like you said, Brother Taylor, there was these women that were mostly his members because they were looking for some sort of guidance. We always want to be guided by the white man. Why? Brother Devon, you know what I mean? Now, I think, and I hope you understand what I'm about to say to you, Brother Taylor, you need to forget about that damn book called Jim Jones and write a book on this brother, Father Divine, and put forward it in the nation to where this man had a program to uplift us. I mean, the way, because you know something, truthfully, black folks don't want to hear nothing about no damn Jim Jones. I'm not going to read a book about no damn Jim Jones, but I'll read a book that's on the critical analysis of Father Divine put forward on what his program was and how it could be used to liberate us, Brother Taylor.
I'm going to do that, but because I'm going to tell you, my wife just told me, and my kids, they told me that when I was doing my research recently on Father Divine, I was in such a happy mood, man. I was running around here just amazed about his power and his impact. It just blew my mind that Father Divine was one of the best. I mean, everybody talk about Ali, and they want to talk about Obama and Martin Luther King. Man, they need to talk about Father Divine. That was the baddest black man I think ever lived, just about. Father Divine.
But nobody knows. Nobody knows or really understands what Father Divine did. I mean, you know, to just put it into this concept. Now, if Father Divine was out on the island, and he put together an agency, and he collectively had 50 people come together and build a community, and they all were able to live well and do the necessary things to have a productive and constructive life.
Right.
That's what we need to know. I mean, as great as Garvey was, Malcolm and all of them, the way it seems to me what you're saying about Father Divine, that needs to be explored by black people. That needs to be witnessed by us. That needs to be understood. Because, listen, Malcolm, King, Garvey, and all of them, Elijah Muhammad, they all had some semblance of a plan. But we really haven't found the plan to really use as an example to try and deal with what's coming, just like you said earlier in the show. This damn Donald Trump. You know, yeah, he's Satan and he's all this and that. But honestly, and I listen to these shows, none of these Negroes that call up to these shows have any sort of plan on how to deal with this cracker. And you know what the crazy thing is? Yesterday proved that even the so-called Democratic Party don't even have a plan on how to deal with that cracker. You know what I mean? But here it is, following them and all of that. And then I'll leave you with this. Whenever you have a Negro like Keith Ellison, what you need to do is just basically take your belt off and whip his ass and sit him on about his business. Because when he did the Farrakhan, there was no need for it. See, you don't have to do what he did to Farrakhan, and it's always been shown that once you do it, you really don't get nothing in return. The only person that ever really got something in return that black people don't understand was basically this clown Obama. And now look at Obama. I mean, did you check out the picture that just hit the media of that Negro looking all slick with a suit on and a white shirt and all of this? You know that Negro's going to be the biggest messiah to black people. I was waiting for that Negro to open up his mouth and say something. Imagine him opening up his mouth and saying how much of a jackass Donald Trump is. But see, this is what's going to happen. He's going to have to open up his mouth after Tuesday, because when your boy Trump gets finished on national TV on Tuesday, people are going to really, really see what type of asshole he is. Because he's not going to be able to construct anything, a plan. It's going to be, I'm telling you, I'm going to tape it just to be able to 5-10 years from now be able to study. And you should too, Taylor, and all of the listeners out here, because if he could constructively go from point A to Z, it will absolutely amaze me. And the type of people that he has surrounded him won't even be able to write it to whereas he could stay on script, because he doesn't have the mental capacity to stay on script for the necessary hour or two. So I think this is going to be the biggest example of what the hell black people are facing, but because we don't have no plan or no one in place to guide us into what we should do, other than somebody saying we should support the Democrat, go out there and do that, you're going to have this Negro, Barack Obama, come out the woodwork and be the Messiah that's going to screw up the game. Have a good one, brothers.
Jay, thank you for your call. Dr. Taylor, we kept you overtime.
That's okay. I'm fine.
I got a couple calls I want to get on because they've been waiting on hold. Okay. Let's go to 602 area code. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Yes, good evening, brothers. This is Brother Marcus from Memphis.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. You know, I was listening to the doctor speak, and the last caller was saying that about we don't have a plan. But, you know, Marcus Garvey did have a plan, you know.
Yes.
What happened, you know, after when they destroyed the Garvey movement, because you notice when they destroyed that movement was when he started making moves, when he went out and bought those ships and was going to develop that trade between Africa and the West. And that was when the system really moved against him. And since then, we have not picked up that button as nationalists. You know, we have not picked up from where Mr. Garvey left off. You see? And that is a plan that we should seriously look at, you know, the shipping lines and developing trade and moving people and goods back and forth to Africa, because we know that it's through trade that's how nations build. That's the big thing Trump talking about now, is trade, right? Isn't it trade? Mm-hmm. Trade with China and trade, you know. So black people, we need to pick up Mr. Garvey's baton and run with Mr. Garvey. Now I want to ask the professor, what about that man by the name of Carlos Cooks, the ideological son of Mr. Garvey? Right. You know, I would like if the doctor can expound on his contribution to the nationalist movement since from Malcolm to now. And I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
Carlos Cooks is one of many of the young alkalites that emerged after and in between, along with Amiri Baraka and Huey Newton and others, through art and through, you know, protest movements, an attempt to, take the mantle and to try to articulate Malcolm's vision and critiques. I think you can see this in various locations throughout. But here in the West Coast, it plays out with Eldridge Cleaver trying to create a organization of African unity headquarters here in San Francisco, because Eldridge saw himself as the next Malcolm, and he wanted to set it up in San Francisco. But so did Amiri Baraka see himself as the next Malcolm down in Newark, New Jersey. And then you had Stokely Carmichael and Carlos Cook and Huey Newton and all of these young men and some sisters, you know, that emerged to try to fill in the gap. And to me, this is an important part of understanding, this whole issue of black leadership, because I think implicit in some of the critiques here, Elliot, is the question of black leadership and the crisis of black leadership that Harold Cruz captured in his book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. When you talk about strong black women, about black men in prisons, where are the brothers, about the vacuum of leadership, about the style of leadership. I mean, part of what people are criticizing is a leadership method and a leadership style that has been the dominant one in black life since really Fred Douglass in the 1890s, and Booker Washington emerges from 1895 until 1915. So Booker Washington becomes the model for the next 90 years, really way past King. King saw himself as a boy from the South, Atlanta, down there in Montgomery. The most powerful black man he had ever heard of was Booker T. Washington. The most powerful black man King ever can conceive of was Booker T. Washington. Booker Washington was, well, without equal, even to this day in black life. There's no one that has even come close to Booker Washington. King has become close in white people's minds. But in terms of black folk, it was Booker Washington. And he set up a style of leadership, a modality of leadership that all other leaders tried to aspire to. Booker mastered it. Du Bois couldn't get it because he was an intellectual and didn't have a mass following, writing about the talented 10 and the double consciousness and, at Harvard or, post-Harvard, writing to a bunch of white folk in the NAACP, a white-led organization on behalf of black people, as he was writing to black folk in the Crisis magazine. So, he didn't have a mass following. Garvey saw this, and Garvey said, I'm going to come to America. I'm going to be the next Booker Washington. He comes in 1916. Booker dies 1915. Garvey tried to come to succeed Booker Washington because Booker was the style of leadership that he aspired to. Malcolm, all of these men wanted to be nobody but Booker. Booker Washington was the style and model of leadership for black people from, I'd say, 1895 when he dies, the same year Frederick Douglass dies. Douglass dies 1895. Booker emerges 1895, gives the famous Atlanta speech in 1895, and then there's Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. Then Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, he dies 1895. So the two towering black men on the scene, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner and Frederick Douglass, both die, I want to say, 1895. Booker continues on to 1915. Garvey comes the year before and never meets Booker, and then Booker dies, and Garvey imagines he's the next coming. And then you have all these styles of black leadership really deriving from what Booker gave us. Going to the White House, the first black man who didn't build the White House, allowed in it, walked through the front door, had dinner with Teddy Roosevelt, created a national scandal, right? And so when King comes along, he wants that style. And I'm trying to hurry up and get to this main point I want to get to. And that is, what we're witnessing today is a repudiation of this style, largely in the Black Lives Matter movement, where you don't see a whole lot of celebration of Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. Because the women, to get back to our earlier conversation, who are leading this movement are largely lesbian, gay, allied, transgender, bi, and other, non, as they call it, cisgendered oriented people organizing as a movement. And what people don't know is Black Lives Matter is a movement for black lesbian, it's a black lesbian-led movement that is really not about black lives in terms of police brutality. And one of the symptoms of it that I've detected here in California, in San Francisco, where all of this activity is going on, and in Oakland, where the Oscar Grant movement launched all of this stuff in 2008 on the, January 1st, 2009 at Fruitvale Station. All of this stuff started here in Oakland. Black Lives Matter, the hashtag was launched where? In D.C.? No. In Philly? No. In Miami? No. In Boston? No. In Chicago? No. Oakland, California is where Black Lives Matter was born. Oscar Grant's movement, where that brother was shot on camera by that cop, Johan Mesley, that's the beginning of all of this. And so what I'm saying is that when you come full scale, the Black Lives Matter movement has its base here in the region that is most well known for the LGBTQ movement. And people can't see that for some reason. They see the police brutality, and they see the Black Lives Matter movement marches mobilizing. The movement leaders know they're gay. All three many women, April Tometi, Alicia Garza, and the other sister whose name I always have a hard time coming up with when I need it. The three of them are lesbian women, proud. They're not ashamed. They're not in the closet. These are proud lesbian women.
Mm-hmm.
When they had their convention in Cleveland, it was a very proud lesbian movement. And Elliot, I'll say this, wrapping this up, I think it's telling that you don't see a whole lot of posters or flyers about Malcolm X in this movement in the way you did in the Black Power movement of the young with Huey and that generation, Fred Hampton and that generation, and Mumia and those people in Philly, and then hip-hop. Hip-hop also valorized Malcolm. Malcolm was hip-hop, the T-shirts, the lyrics in Chuck D and Boogie Down Production and the music coming out of Philly with the Roots. All of that stuff was influenced by Malcolm. And yet Black Lives Matter has been on the scene at least since 13. And I think if you take a step back and look, you'll see Malcolm is not being brought forward to the young or by the young in this moment in the way Malcolm has in the last two with Black Power and hip-hop. And that, to me, is a symptom of the fact that these young women who have led this movement are rejecting the Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King, black male, heterosexual, preacher, privileged style of leadership that has dominated black life for decades. So I'm saying that Black Lives Matter is a revolution within the revolution. If the black community is rose up against these police that are shooting us, unarmed and innocent, because almost none of these people who've been shot, none of them were involved in crime, except defined by white people. And I'm talking about loosely defined, because Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, none of them were involved in actual criminal activity. Not Sandra Bland, none of them had a gun in their hand and were robbing a store or something like that. Not Mike Brown, none of them. They were all innocent. And so when you bring all of that full circle, you begin to see, I think, the full reality that black people are dealing with, and how these efforts come into play.
And if I may,
go ahead, Richard.
The thing that I take away from you, which is really important to me, that the notion that you raised about the historical separation of the political leadership of black male in this Black Lives Matters. Yep. But the thing that we have, I think that is also important when you use the Father Divine, and as you use the historical trajectory, is that the whole collective, community collective social economic structure was in place while the male dominant political structure was projecting. That I think in this time is what we lost. Even with the hip hop culture, it never really was able to create a collective economic social structure.
Right.
As we move into a question about power, and the other thing about the Black Lives Matter, that they're being financed from someplace else.
Right.
But I think the most important thing as we move forward in recognizing that historical thing of using those black male leaders that were effective in being able to communicate and educate to the general populace. And I like the idea that you present to us about Father Divine not being attacked, which is this other thing about the military attack against the political male leadership that was able to really galvanize the community, how they were taken off by the federal state military. I think that sometimes we really forget the ones, we might see the ones who are effective now, who create mega churches or political entrepreneurs or businessmen, but the men and women who were able to truly galvanize those people that I believe that you speak to about the Jim Jones community, those men and women were always taken out by the state.
That's right. That's right. And I think Michelle Alexander's recently, sort of tried to bring this out with her book, The New Jim Crow, even though, it's a 2011 book. She's tried to sort of emphasize people are asking where are all the fathers, she's saying they're in the prisons, you know,
right.
And that's where we need to, and that to me, Elliot, is also a part of this general response to Martin Luther King's question of community or chaos. Ronald Reagan is an extension of that chaos through the war on drugs and the mass incarceration regime.
Okay.
It is a part of the madness. Ronald Reagan is a part of the madness that we are experiencing. And this man's been long gone, but Donald Trump is invoking Reagan at every juncture. Andrew Jackson, he's trying to find the most harmful white people he can think of in our history and raising them up as his symbols of leadership. Andrew Jackson now hangs over his head in the Oval Office, and he aspires, you know, to be Andrew Jackson on one level and just an overseer towards our history on another. So I think, you know, what black people have to do, you know, I mean, you look at, right, let me get back on hip-hop. I mean, Black Lives Matter real quick, just to follow up on that final point, is, again, I think it's interesting. And I've been out here in San Francisco and in Oakland to a bunch of the street-level actions. I've been out since Occupy. I've been going out into the streets. I got a picture of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling in my trunk that I drive around with, a picture of those two brothers in my car from when I last attended a march, and I walked up and down Broadway with their picture held up over my head. So I ain't no brother that's just sitting around reading and writing about black things. I'm out there in the front line. And when you sort of see, you know, Black Lives Matter organizing, it is largely hostile toward any kind of thinking about black male-female solidarity and coalition and working together that is not also, you know, retaliated against with a viciousness that tells a brother, you get in line, because as a black woman, I'm not going to take, you know, being second to you, so now you get behind me. And I think that's what is also happening in the Black Lives Matter movement. Is not like these sisters have recalibrated and said, okay, let's do this thing together side by side like it should have been in the first place. It's sort of like, okay, you all were wrong as men for going too far as men, so we're going to reproduce that by becoming women and make it all about sex and sexuality and gender and women's equality and parity and in terms of us trying to mobilize around that, as opposed to the things that we have been able to mobilize around in the past. And I think that's going to be a real challenge. There's got to be a lot of internal black politics conflict within our own group. We got to have a kind of internal civil war over the next, I think, 15 to 20 years, because the next generation will be clear and coherent by then. For sure, the Jesse Jackson civil rights generation will be gone for sure. And then the hip-hop generation will be the elders, for sure, as they're already approaching that now, the oldest ones of them. And so at some point around the next 20-plus years, there's going to be a new need for articulation of a new generation's politics. And I think Black Lives Matter is the beginning of it, around the way in which they've unpacked sexuality and gender in ways that you and me as black men may not like, because we feel like we have a role and should have a principal role in our liberation, and I think we should. But these people have been trained by the likes of Bell Hooks and many other male and female academics and scholars who are deconstructionists, and they believe in deconstructing everything about the black church, about black sexuality, about black community, about black men, about black husbands, about black fathers, about black life in ways that are not unparalleled, or let me say it this way, they believe in deconstruction in the same ways that, is this name Stephen Bannon, from this guy who just made a speech this past week and said that all of these people we've appointed to government aren't there to reform it, but they are there to deconstruct the government, to tear it apart piece by piece, is what he said 2 days ago. That's what the deconstruction is. It ain't here to simply make room for sister revolutionaries and leaders where they've been neglected by brothers with Malcolm and Martin and Huey and Jake Rivera and other males that we've privileged like Stokely Carmichael. They are here to erase brothers as contributors to black liberation, and anything that is associated with this in terms of the black church's traditional role of providing education and organization and meeting places for the black church and movements in the 20th century, all that stuff is gone, and they are right back where Huey was when he said we defected the black community. I'm saying Black Lives Matter, as the LGBTQ movement, is in the position of the Panthers in 66 when it got so radical and got so caught up in these white folk liking it that they got so caught up in the seduction that their main audience became white people and white radicals and not the black community. And that's when Huey had to fix that with coming back to the black community, mainly through the black church. And as much as I know this irritates Sister Sarah in terms of the black church's ongoing importance, Black Lives Matter is making the same premature movement mistake that the Black Panthers did by attempting to undermine the things that are familiar to people that make the movements theirs. You can't take Malcolm away in the name of Black Lives Matter's women's liberation if you want brothers to also participate, because Malcolm has been the clearest articulation of what black men, the majority of any single kind of formation of black men in general, if any kind of grouping of black men there is, Martin represents one clear articulation, and Malcolm represents another clear articulation of what black men imagine for themselves, in the post-World War II period. Like it or not, call it sexist if you need to, but they represent clear voices that black men have found some solidarity around. And so for Black Lives Matter now to subtly disappear Malcolm and put Malcolm aside is to confirm their instructions that they are to be democratic, anti-hierarchical, they are to be widely decentralized so that every meeting is held without a single leader. It's how we saw Occupy had no leader and Black Lives Matter had no leader. And people of the old cloth keep looking for a leader to be emerging. But the fact that we are at least 3 years in and no leader has clearly emerged outside of D. Ray McKesson's, own personal stuff, ambitions out there in Baltimore trying to be, run for city council or whatever, there really has been no clear face of Black Lives Matter. And that is a part of a strategy. And I'm saying to you, subsumed or caught up in that is the old style of black male leadership represented by everyone from Booker Washington to Garvey to King to Farrakhan to Jesse Al and even Reverend Jeremiah Wright. That whole style, I think, is probably now going to be retired by the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of articulating any kind of national black will.
Well, I mean, it's worth watching. I agree with your assessment on it. I think that we can agree, because me and Richard talk about this a lot, that the money that's funneled into those organizations is kind of setting the agenda for it.
Yes, sir.
You look at the leadership in a lot of these cities. In fact, one of the callers that called earlier, he attended a meeting where the leadership of Black Lives Matter in Philadelphia was there, and it's 2 gay women and a homosexual man.
That's right.
And the women get up there and said at the meeting, "I'm queer." I mean, they just let you know. So that kind of shows that this whole thing is intentional, it's systematic, and I think it lends to what you're talking about causing an internal civil war among conscious young people in the black community.
Yeah.
So,
and in the meantime, the Koch brothers funneled $25 million to the United Negro College Fund to be distributed across the black colleges because Obama made a policy change in the loans and the lending policies that made it difficult for people like me. When I was a kid, my family didn't have good credit or anything like that, so people like me couldn't even get in under Obama. And he tweaked policies that have hurt black youth in the HBCUs. If anybody remembers, the Congressional Black Caucus met with Obama and came out kicking and screaming about his positions on the HBCUs.
Yes.
And so the Koch brothers saw this, and this was national. This was carried by AP. The Koch brothers tried to embarrass Obama. They gave $25 million to the United Negro College Fund, and they created a committee, and that committee of about 7 people was to have 4 people, I think, 2 that the colleges can choose, and 2 that the Koch brothers can choose, and then the 3 at-large seats. But the Kochs have the decision-making, committee arrangement for the monies, that $25 million to be distributed across the HBCUs. And its intention is to create a whole nother dimension to this conversation, a conservative black, leadership. To nurture black conservatism in the black community, because we are very conservative. The black community is conservative on LGBTQ, on homosexuality, marriage equality, the black church, not so much black people, but black Protestants in particular, black religious people. Black Protestants are very conservative on marriage equality. And that puts them at variance with LGBTQ. And even though the Black Lives Matter movement has gotten 70% of black opinion support, I think it's because black people don't know the subtlety of what Black Lives Matter as a movement is really about in terms of its leadership cohort. Most black folks just see the police aspect, and we're responding to the fact that they're responding to the same stuff we're responding to. But Black Lives Matter has its own subterranean agenda, and that subterranean agenda has been to articulate and mainstreaming the LGBTQ dimension of black life in the same way in national politics that the racists under Bannon have been emerged to articulate the right-wing racist element that had always been marginal, just like the LGBTQ had been in black community. You've seen these sort of marginal forces emerge out of the confusion and the chaos of the first black president and the white backlash that responded. I mean, all of this is part of the confusion of the racial moment we're living in.
This will open up a whole new topic, but I'm going to say this before I kind of let you go, Professor Taylor, and round up the program. We see a lot of things being thrown into the mix, which is what you're talking about. Yeah. And, that kind of brings to mind the statements that was made by T.D. Jakes about his understanding is starting to evolve. He's for gay marriage, for setting up LGBT churches. Right. And T.D. Jakes is one of the most influential ministers that a lot of black people follow that's involved in Christianity. And then you had for the young members or younger folks, you had during that Grammy Award show, you had, what's the short brother's name? Kurt Franklin come out there wearing a red mini dress. Wow. So you see a lot of things going on. Those guys are not doing those things or saying those things alone or in a vacuum. I really believe that those messages are being placed to them or being told to them to be put out here among our people for a reason. All of those things are distractions.
There's money in those hills.
No, I agree, and I think that's part of the religious. You want to talk about the religious madness of Jim Jones and the religious, the mental parts of that. I do think that the madness of white supremacy, the madness of racism, has given us all kinds of outlets, and some of the outlets we've sought have been insane, and some of these outlets have led to all kinds of psychological behaviors and manifestations. I support marriage equality. I'm teaching in San Francisco. I'm in the headquarters of homosexuality in America. I'd be insane trying to be, hostile to gay people with where I work, and the black community over here in Oakland is really, influenced by the LGBTQ community. So I'm in ground zero. But it seems to me that Jim Jones was one form of a black mental outcome. In other words, we sought him because of the madness that white supremacy had produced in us, and we just sought him out as one avenue and one solution. And people are seeking sexuality issues out as other solutions. But to me, it's all part of the larger chaos of this country and this white supremacy. To me, this book I'm writing about Jim Jones and People's Temple is really a book about white supremacy and the way integration really was demonic for us. I'm saying that integration was like Jonestown for us. That integration has created chaos. That integration has created all of these mental and social maladies where we're proud to call ourselves niggers, where our young people are walking around with their pants down to their knees now and proud of it, where I won't even get in on young women. I mean, so there's something that has happened, and I think, that this all of these psychological manifestations are true. And Elliot, I didn't get a chance to go into the details of some of the people that survived, but let me tell the story of one kid. In the outline I sent you, there's a story of a boy named Jakari Wilson. He was the youngest child to survive from the killings at Jonestown, when his mother and a group of people escaped earlier that day. His father was one of the soldiers who killed people that day, and his father killed himself that day. Even to death, he defended Jim Jones. Jakari's father, one day here in Oakland, California, in about 1994, the police were chasing some boys that had engaged in a drive-by shooting. Jakari Wilson took an AK-47 and shot at the police in Oakland and killed an Oakland police officer. I just told you that the youngest baby to survive the killings in Jonestown in 1978 on his mother's breast survived the jungle, came to Oakland, killed a cop at about 19 or 20 years old, maybe 24 years old. He killed a cop in 1985, so I guess he was 17, 18 years old. Killed a cop, and that cop was black. He's now in prison, facing 104 years in prison. The youngest person to have survived Jim Jones is in prison 104 years.
Wow.
So, Elliot, one day when I was looking, and I go to these annual burials, they have 305 of the children, mostly black, buried in a mass grave in East Oakland, in a black cemetery in East Oakland called the Evergreen Cemetery. And every November 18th, the people who survived that are still alive, they come and they meet. A white group meets, and they praise Jim Jones, and a black group meets later in the day, and they send Jim Jones to hell over and over and over again. They have two separate ceremonies. The black folks send Jim Jones to hell over and over again. And one time when I was listening to this, one of the sisters who lost 27 members of her family.
That's what I was getting ready to say. I seen an article where it was a man that lost his wife, his daughters, and 27 members.
In this particular case, it was a woman named Janona Norwood.
Okay.
She lost 27 members of her family. And she said at that event, she said they took Martin Luther King's dream down to Jonestown, to Guyana, and they turned it into a weapon of mass destruction. And when I heard that, Elliot, I was looking across East Oakland, where I was living with my wife and children, and I was looking across East Oakland, which is still hard and rough right now, and I was looking across, and I was standing on the graves of 305 black kids that died in Guyana, and I said to myself, what if those children had lived? What if they had survived Jim Jones? What if they had survived Jonestown? What if those 305 mostly black babies had survived the killings in Jonestown and entered into Ronald Reagan's America just 3 to 5 years later with the war on drugs? In less than a decade, the war on drugs was there waiting for them, Elliot. In less than a decade, within 5 years between the killings at Jonestown, what was waiting for them was Ronald Reagan's war on drugs. And as I look out at these kids, as I looked at this gravesite and looked out at East Oakland and the killings that had gone over in East Oakland and the hard life for black people living in East Oakland and Latinos and blacks, I said, well, hell, Jim Jones was one kind of death and Ronald Reagan was a whole other kind of death with his war on drugs. And so that's what really brought this book in a full circle for me, was one day when I was standing over the graves of the children. I looked out at East Oakland and I said, if they had lived, what better chances would they have had under Ronald Reagan? And that's the gist. Where the other brother wants to hear me talk about the hope that Father Divine represented, I intend to bring that out in the book. I clearly intend to bring that out in the book. But in the meantime, I want black folk to understand that they have been through a demon political policy called the war on drugs that has had such a devastating impact on them that the only thing I could think of to even help them see what I think has happened to them is the way those black bodies were piled up down there in Jonestown in 1978. And Elliot, you are a young enough man to know all that death you saw growing up in Philly in the 80s and 90s, all the death we saw in all of the cities all over. Elliot, I just kept coming back to the scene of all those black bodies at Jonestown. And every time I kept in the 90s and 80s when the crack war was going on, seeing 2 and 3 black boys at the news at 6 and at 11, upside down, facing down, body bloated, blood, just like Michael Brown in 2013. Elliot, I couldn't help but to try to extract from what I saw in Jonestown that very same image of us turned upside down, back to the world that has treated us like hell, that we kept trying to find solutions, any kind of solution. Leave the South, go to Pennsylvania, leave the South, go to California, leave California, go to Guyana, leave Guyana, and leave this world to get free. And it's just like the sister back we were talking about, Margaret Garner. As awful and as brutal of a dilemma as that sister was forced to make, whether to send her kids back into slavery or to kill them. These sisters in Guyana had to make the same choice, whether to kill their children there or face them back into this demon world that they saw as people of temple. The People's Temple movement said Ronald Reagan emerging in national politics is ominous for black people in America. And they saw him as a death alternative, and they took the alternative. So as much as people can't see this, I'm saying if you can understand the sister in the movie Beloved and her dilemma, I'm asking you to have some compassion on those sisters, even if they were misled by Jim Jones in Guyana, and still understand behind Jim Jones was a much evil demon, a greater demon, and that demon was white supremacy standing behind Jim Jones, and those sisters saw that demon standing behind Jim Jones. That's what they saw, Brother Elliot. They saw the evil behind Jim Jones, and that's why they put up with his foolishness. And they were trying to deal with that evil that they had run from in Mississippi and Oklahoma and Arkansas and came to California, and it was here waiting for them. So then they left it here and went to Guyana, and they got tired, and they laid their burden down. Like so many other black people, like Margaret Garner, the sister who was in Beloved. That sister, that movie's about her killing her children, but that movie don't tell her, and that movie don't tell us that she ended up killing herself. She even found this situation insane. And now these people have elected a white man who has told us he's the devil. And now we got to deal with this. And so I think my book is timely. It may not be happy. It may not be pleasant. It may not be the hopeful ministry and example that Father Divine offered, but it is a warning that we are amongst a people that thought Ronald Reagan was okay and that think that Donald Trump is okay. And I'm saying, if you can see Jim Jones' evil, then I want you to see the evil that I see in these other men that other folk think is just fine.
Before we leave this evening, Professor Taylor, give out any contacts where people can get the book is not out yet, but
it's coming out. It's going to take me about another 12 months to finish writing it because this is not easy work, and it's got to go through a review process. But the 40th anniversary of the 1978 massacre is next year. So I'm trying to beat that deadline, but if not, at the latest, it'll be out 2019. But I think it will be an important book because it does deal with black religion and politics and social movements and all of this stuff in California politics. I'm trying to use this as a sponge to talk about all of our politics from World War II on forward, both regionally and nationally, and to say ultimately integration, it was Jim Jones's dream, and look at what it did to our people. And I'm saying Martin Luther King's dream was integration for our people, and look at what Ronald Reagan did to our people. So that's the dismal and the message of my book is integration ultimately was like Jonestown for us because it's killing us as a people under these circumstances.
Professor Taylor, I'll be in touch with you, and thanks for being with us.
Take care.
Peace.